Hello everybody, I'm back with another voiceover on how I did the digital painting in Procreate. This dragon here is one from my Oracle deck, and I wanted to go through and show how I did this. So we'll go to the time-lapse replay. You can see here, I always start with the crystals with these designs just so I then have kind of a feel for what the dragon might look like. With the crystal, I added a lot of different textures, some really cool brushes that were called glitter rake that had a really neat like dimension and highlight. And then I do rim lighting all the way around the crystal. And here I'm drawing out a hand, and you'll see I go from a hand to a couple of different tails. I wasn't happy with the hand. Holding the crystal just didn't look right, so I let my Kickstarter backers vote on which one they liked the best. And here I'm outlining the entire head and neck area, doing one base color there, do the back wing and everything on its own layer, the belly color on its own layer, and then the horns and spikes. And then I'm just doing the flat colors first. I turn off my sketch just to make sure there's no gaps and everything's filled in all the way. And then once I go back to my sketch, I kind of start some of the shadows, and then I lay in a layer of scales for texture. And then there I am, turning all the layers off and then trying some different designs, a couple of different scale pose or tail poses to hold the crystal. I even try like a wing holding the crystal, and then I let everybody on Kickstarter vote which one's their favorite, and the tail was by far the most popular. And yeah, and here's trying out a wing to see if I'd like that. And that was me just turning layers on and off. And I've come back to it, and then I start on the tail, because I know that's the one I'm going to be doing for sure. All the little spikes down the tail are on their own layer too. And the eye is actually on its own layer at this point. And then here I go back of another overlay layer on top of the scale texture, and I go back and detail every single scale. I use sort of like a watercolor brush for this effect. And I'm actually going to skip forward because this takes forever. This was the longest part of the painting, was to sit here and detail every single one of the scales. Looking back on it, that probably would have been an easier way of doing this, but I just really liked this pattern, and so I wanted those scales to really pop. So once I get that done, I'm adding in a little more texture to the spikes above the eye, and then turn my sketch back on so I can go back and darken those shadows and go really dark around like the eye socket and under the horn. I usually will turn the sketch off to kind of see where, if any place it needs darker shadows, where something's just not showing up enough. So like the back wing, I had a lot more shadow there. And around the eye, kind of detailing those scales out even more. Then detailing the eye out, doing a shadow in the eye, and of course highlight. And all the horns and spikes, get a texture layer done in overlay. And then I go back and add shadow to those as well. And you can see I was turning my borders on and off to make sure I'm not doing anything too important outside the border. I usually do 2 layers of shadow for everything. Sometimes I'll combine those layers down once I like the way it looks. And then go back and add even more texture into the horns with a little bit darker shadows. And even do the same thing with some of the scales that I just really want emphasis on. And then going back and doing another layer for highlights. And just bringing out like the lightest area, some more shadows in the neck to give it even more texture. And while these shadows may look like black, it's actually just a dark green. Try to avoid using any black in the shadow color. And then for the background, I do a simple, just multiple color background with like a larger brush. And you'll see that here in a second. I'm still adding more highlights. And then some detail and highlights in the wings, or the webbing of the wings, I guess it'd be called. Adding more shadow and highlight to just give it even more texture. And there's that background. And then I go back on another layer and do rim lighting, and even pop in some areas that need to be really bright, like eyelids and just all the way around rim lighting and bounce light. So there I'm turning layers on and off to find the right one. And then doing that color dodge around areas that would be getting some like reflective light. So that is that, and I'll go over the layers here. So here's my sketch layer, and you can see, I start turning layers off, you'll be able to see how it looks a little odd because I originally drew the hand in there holding the crystal, and then went back, like I said, and did the tail. And so that's why there's just a big blank spot, because I already deleted that out. It's just all on a black background. There's my background that I did. It's some kind of blending colors. And then each part gets its own layer, and everything is named, except for that one. That's the hand. I just need to delete, because that was the one I ended up not using. So we'll turn the sketch off here. This is just my guides. These are here because this will become an oracle card in my oracle deck, and I wanted to make sure anything important was within those boundaries. I'll turn that back off. We'll go down to, let's go to the main part of the body. So this is the main part of the dragon here, and I always start with just the base color, and then using clipping mask I start doing those layers on top. So I've got an overlay layer for the first part of the texture of the scales, and then that other overlay layer where you saw me detailing every single scale, which took so very long. Like I said, I probably shouldn't have done it that way. I figured out ways of doing it a little easier now. But looking back, it gave it a cool effect. It just took so long to finish. And then I've got 2 layers of shadow. I do that so with this first multiply layer, if I want to go darker in some areas, I don't want to smudge the shadows out too much. So I just do a second layer on top of the real dark shadows. And a lot of times I'll combine those down. Like I could probably combine those down now, and it wouldn't make any kind of difference to the art, and then save a little bit of space. If you're finding you're running out of room for layers, one, I probably shouldn't be doing that many layers, but the other option is to start combining things down and then duplicate your entire artwork, or actually other way around. Duplicate your entire artwork so you don't mess anything up, and then combine layers down. So that way you have more room to work, but if something, messes up or you're unhappy, you go back to your original. So hope that made sense. So another overlay layer here for highlights. And then I've got that color dodge layer on top that does that rim lighting, and then just a little nice cast lighting, like right there in the neck and the chin. And everything else was done the same way with the base color. You see the horns here. We've got the base color. I did the teeth on that layer too. I do that overlay layer for texture, a multiply layer for shadow, another overlay layer for highlights, and then a color dodge layer for the brightest highlights and rim lighting. So yeah, everything was done the same way. You can see there's a little detail in the eye. Don't really notice too much, but it's there. About the only thing that was done a little differently is the stone. For it, I still have that original base layer of just base color. Then I did a layer on top just set to normal instead of overlay to start doing some cool textures. Mostly because I had some brushes that I knew I wanted them to really show up. And then you've got the shadow layer, and then second shadow layer there. And then I've got a color dodge layer instead of the overlay. So stuff would really, really pop and really give those highlights of the crystal And then I have an add layer instead of color dodge on the top of that one, again, to really make the crystal kind of look like it glows. I probably should have done a glowing effect. I do that with a lot of the crystals. I didn't do it this time, mostly because I wanted the dragon's face to be more the focus. And then, let's see, the eye and horns are on one layer. And you can see the belly done the same way. And this one I've actually got, well, I say same way, it's a little different. This one has 3 layers of shadow. I've got the first one there. I did that because I would have normally done overlay at that point, but that brush was reversed. So I left it at multiply. First layer of shadows, second layer of shadows, and more detailing, overlay layer for highlights, and then that color dodge layer. So just a little tiny bit different, but most are all done kind of the same way. And I could go back and combine some of these layers down now if I needed to save space, because it really doesn't need, like that back claw doesn't have to be on its own layer, versus that front claw is on its own layer as well, I think. Yeah, like I combine those. But for the sake of this, I left all these layers this way. And about the only thing I would do beyond this is take this into Adobe Illustrator and add a vignette. There's no real easy way to do a vignette in Procreate, at least not yet. The only thing I've found is to do something kind of like that, where you take a really large soft brush and kind of just go around the outside, maybe Gaussian blur it a little bit. But it just doesn't, it gives you an idea of what the vignette will look like, but it doesn't work quite right. So I do that in Illustrator, and then I also add my text in Illustrator. But you could add text here in Procreate. It is possible. They have a lot of options for text. And to do text is pretty easy. You just go over here to your little wrench, hit add, and add text. And a little text box pops up with all your options, all your different fonts. I have a lot of fonts, so that's how you add text in Procreate. But like I said, I do it in Illustrator just because it's easier for me to do that at an actual keyboard. So yeah, this is how I did. Now I'm going to delete that text layer because it's going to throw me off. So there's that text layer. I'm just going to swipe left and delete. So, yep. Anyway, so this is how I did the Peridot dragon in Procreate.